Tonight I'm going to tell you a tale forged by the frontier itself, a story of grit, betrayal, and a kind of love that could only be born where the land is unforgiving and mercy is rare. It begins with a man who had survived more than gunfights and long trails. He carried his wars inside his chest, carved deep by years of loss. His name was Koda Apache, by blood and by soul. For most of his life, Koda drifted from place to place, trading muscle for pay, never staying long enough to belong anywhere. When he finally gathered the last of his hard-earned money, he used it to buy a stretch of land far from town, a worn-down ranch. Everyone else had already written off. To Koda, it wasn't just broken fences and sun-bleached boards. It was a chance to claim something of his own. A chance to plant his boots in the dirt and say, "This is where I stand." He imagined quiet dawns, the creak of leather, saddles, mesquite, smoke hanging low at dusk. Peace wrestled from stubborn ground. But in the West, peace is fragile. Every fence hides a memory. Every house holds ghosts. And this land was no different. He didn't know her name then. Only rumors had reached him, a woman abandoned, stripped bare by betrayal, hollowed out by loss. The dust town folk said she kept to herself, more shadow than flesh, someone best avoided. But the frontier has a way of dragging the broken toward one another. And on Koda's very first day on his land, fate would force him to meet her sorrow face to face. This is not only a story about a ranch or a man or a woman. It's about how despair can be turned on its head when two wounded souls refuse to fall alone. If this story stirs something in you, stay with me until the end. The valley lay wide and hushed as Koda rode in that afternoon. The sun hung low, a molten coin pressed against the horizon. Dust and mesquite filled the air sharp on the tongue. His horse iron moved with steady patience, each step carrying him closer to the land that now bore his name. To most men, it was a useless spread, too remote, too broken to bother with. To Koda, it was the promise he'd been chasing all his life. The ranch emerged slowly from the haze. A weather-beaten house sagged against the wind, its boards gray with age. A barn leaned nearby roof, bowed doors dangling loose on rusted hinges. Fences slumped in crooked lines, the kind of damage that demanded months of hard labor. But Koda didn't see ruin. He saw a skeleton strong enough to live again. A place where no one told him when to move on. No one weighed his worth. For better or worse, this land was his. As iron passed through the open gate, the silence pressed in thick heavy. Not the quiet of rest, but the stillness of something unresolved. Iron's ear twitched, uneasy. Koda's eyes narrowed. His gaze locked on the barn where something dark swayed in the heat. At first he thought it was torn canvas or a loose plank. Then the truth cut through him. A woman. Her body hung from a rope looped over a beam, bare feet hovering inches above the dirt. A broken chair lay beneath her, one leg snapped clean. Nailed to a nearby post was a rough board, smeared with a single word in black paint: shame. Koda was out of the saddle before iron fully stopped. His boots slammed into the earth. Steel flashed as his knife came free in one clean motion. The blade bit through the rope with a sharp snap, and her weight collapsed into his arms, far too light. Her auburn hair touched with gold brushed his skin as he lowered her to the ground. Her face was pale freckles stark against ashen flesh. Her lips were parted, empty of breath. Koda pressed his mouth to hers, forcing air into lungs that had already surrendered. His palm struck her chest once, then again, until a harsh cough ripped free. She gasped, dragging life back into herself. Green eyes fluttered open wide and unfocused before locking onto the stranger hovering over her. "Go," she rasped, her voice raw and shredded. "You don't want to be here." Koda crouched beside her, unmoving, solid as stone. "No one hangs a soul on my land," he said evenly, and walks away. She studied him through a blink of disbelief, confusion clashing hard with bitterness in her eyes. Her gaze drifted past him toward the barn, where the wooden sign knocked softly against the post, tapping in rhythm with the wind. Then her eyes returned to the man standing before her. Koda held out his hand. She hesitated, fingers trembling, before finally placing her palm in his. Her grip was rough, calloused, far stronger than he expected from someone who had just been cut down from a rope. When she stood, her legs wavered. Koda stepped in, steadying her until her balance returned. She wore a plain cotton shirt, frayed at the seams, a leather vest darkened by years of use, and a work skirt bleached thin by sun and dust. A revolver rested at her hip, its holster scarred and worn smooth from long carrying. "Your name's Evelyn Hart," he said. Her jaw tightened. "It used to be." Koda glanced toward the house. "Not anymore." A harsh, broken laugh escaped her throat. "Not since Silas Crow sold everything out from under me. The cattle, the tools, even the bed." Her voice cracked once. "He rode off with another woman and left me with nothing but this place. And the shame that came with it." She swallowed hard. "And when you've got nothing left, the Dust Town folk make damn sure you don't forget it." Koda didn't ask for details. He'd seen enough ruin in a lifetime to recognize it. He only said quietly, "Come inside. You need water." The house smelled of dust and abandonment, the air stale from months of silence. She drank slowly from his canteen, hands shaking as if she hadn't held anything steady in weeks. "Why here?" Koda asked softly. "Why that way?" Her eyes dropped to the cup. "Because it was the last thing I had. And they took that too." She paused. "Once the last piece of yourself is gone, there's nothing left worth protecting." Koda studied her in the slanted light. She stood upright, even now, though her eyes carried a weight that would have crushed weaker souls. He'd seen that look before on men staring across battlefields, on women who had buried too much too soon. Finally he said, "This land belongs to me now. Bought it legal this morning." Her head snapped up. "So he can't take it back?" Koda shook his head slowly. "Not unless he tries to take it from me. And that would be a mistake." For the first time, relief flickered across her face, then fear rushed in after it. "You don't know him." "I don't need to," Koda replied, his voice calm and unshaken. "You stayed when he ran. That makes this place your home as much as mine if you want it." Silence stretched between them. The shutters rattled in the wind. A coyote called from the ridge. At last she whispered, "Why would you care? You don't even know me." Koda met her eyes without flinching. "Because someone once cared enough to keep me standing. And because no one hangs a soul on my land and walks away." Her shoulders loosened just a fraction. She nodded. "All right, Koda," she said quietly. "I'll stay, for now." He straightened, nodding toward the window where the shame sign still swung clacking against the post. "Then we'll start with food, and tomorrow we fix that fence." A faint smile touched her lips. Tired, fragile, but real. As the last light bled from the desert sky, Koda knew one truth without doubt: trouble was already riding toward them. Night settled heavy over the ranch, thick with the smell of dry earth and distant rain. Inside the weathered house, the flame of a single oil lamp pushed back the dark as Koda sat at the table. Koda rested his hands on the tabletop, the wood worn smooth by decades of hard use, while Evelyn Hart cradled a chipped coffee mug between both palms. Since agreeing to stay, she hadn't said much. Her green eyes tracked the flickering lamplight as though she expected it to gut her out and abandon her to the dark once more. Koda didn't push. He'd learned long ago that silence could be armor, sometimes the only protection a person had left. Instead, he asked simply, "You know how to cook?" A faint smile crossed her lips, quick and edged with bitterness. "When there's something worth cooking." He nodded toward the pantry. "Not much in there right now. We'll fix that." Her eyes lifted to him, doubtful, then dropped back to her cup. "You talk like you're staying a while." "I am," Koda replied without hesitation. $40 says I am." That pulled something out of her. She hadn't felt in weeks. A laugh. Low, rough around the edges, but real. She shook her head, as if the sound surprised her, then drew the mug closer, holding the warmth like it might keep her standing. The house groaned in the windboards, rattling against the frame. Without thinking, Evelyn's hand drifted to her throat. Her fingers brushed the bruises left by the rope. She caught herself and dropped her hand fast, busying it again with the mug. But Koda had already noticed. "You got family in town?" he asked, his tone even. "No," she said after a pause. "The closest thing I had was Silas Crow." The name scraped out sharp like grit between her teeth. "He hasn't been a husband for a long time." Koda said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Men like Silas Crow were scattered all across the frontier, quick to take, slow to keep, and dangerous when they believed something they'd thrown away still belonged to them. "You should know," Evelyn added quietly. "He's not the kind to let go. If he hears you bought this place, he'll come." Koda met her gaze, steady as stone. "Then we'll be ready." By morning, the land smelled of dew and mesquite. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hair pulled back, pale light, carving sharp lines beneath her eyes. Koda was already in the corral, repairing a gate that leaned like an old drunk. His movements were deliberate, shaped by years of building things up and tearing them down again. She watched him for a moment before stepping closer. "You know that won't hold." His eyes lifted. "Then show me better." For the first time since meeting him, her mouth curved into something close to a smile. She took the hammer from his hand, squared the post with a practiced eye, and drove the nail clean. The sharp crack echoed across the yard. Koda gave a single nod, not condescension, but respect. The morning passed in the steady rhythm of work. They patched boards, hauled water-swept dust from floors layered, thick like sediment from another life. Each small task peeled away the ruin, exposing bones still worth saving by noon. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves, arms streaked with dirt and sweat. The sight startled Koda, not because she was fragile, but because she wasn't. Scarred or not, she worked without faltering, calloused hands, straight back. The bitterness in her laughter softened, replaced by something closer to resolve. As the sun dropped low, they shared bread and apples Koda had brought from town. Sitting on the porch steps, they chewed in silence, watching the sky burn copper. Evelyn spoke first. "You didn't have to save me yesterday." Her voice was quiet but firm. Koda looked at her, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. "I didn't have to," Koda said quietly. "But I wasn't going to watch someone give up." Her throat tightened. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Koda leaned in just enough for his words to carry weight. His eyes held hers. "I do. When the army came, my people were scattered. Our ground was taken. Our families were driven into dust. I worked cattle for men who paid in scraps and insults." He paused. "Every step since then has been about proving I was more than what they decided I was." Her lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time, she didn't just see the stranger who had saved her life, she saw a man carrying scars of his own. Different wounds cut just as deep. The air between them shifted. Not love, not yet. Something older settled there. Recognition. Two souls, shaped by different storms, standing in the same wind. That evening, Evelyn Hart set a pot of beans on the fire. The scent filled the room, earthy and warm. Koda sat nearby, drawing steel along steel as he sharpened his knife, the rasp steady and controlled. Outside, coyotes sang across the valley, their calls rising and falling like a hymn. Evelyn stirred the pot and murmured almost to herself, "It feels strange, eating with someone again." Koda slid the knife home. "Strange doesn't mean bad." She looked at him, really looked, and found no judgment there, only patience, only a steady presence that didn't flinch from her broken edges. Later, with the dishes done and the fire banked low, Evelyn lingered at the window. Her reflection wavered in the dark glass. The bruises at her throat stood out in the lamplight. She traced them with her fingertips, the shame still sharp. Behind her, Koda's voice came calm and sure. "You're still standing. That counts more than you think." She swallowed and turned from the window. "What about you?" she asked. "Why stay on land?" Everyone else walked away from. Koda's gaze traveled the room, the patched roof, the bare boards thinned by years. "Because it's mine. Because I chose it. And I'm done letting others decide where I belong." Evelyn let out a slow breath. For the first time in months, the weight on her chest eased. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. He already understood. Night settled in, carrying a fragile kind of peace. Two souls, both battered, both scarred, still standing. Not bound by love. Not yet. Bound by something older. Something stronger. A refusal to bow. And in that fragile beginning, hope took root. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when Evelyn spotted a rider cresting the far ridge. Dust lifted behind him, glowing in the pale light. Even at that distance, she knew the shape of those shoulders, the hunched posture of a man always braced for a fight. Her breath caught. Silas Crow. Koda stepped onto the porch, beside her rifle resting easy in his hands. His eyes tracked the lone figure cutting across the valley. "That him, Evelyn?" asked her voice, cracking on the words. "Yes." The rider slowed near the gate, pulling up hard. Silas Crow's face was burned dark with trail dust, and whiskey eyes, bloodshot mouth, twisted into something that might have passed for a smile if not for the cruelty etched into every line. He leaned forward in the saddle, forearms draped over the horn. "Well," he drawled, a voice rough. "Looks like the little wife found herself a new protector." Koda didn't move. He didn't flinch. His voice stayed calm, unshaken. "This land is mine now, bought and paid for." Silas Crow laughed low and mean. "Doesn't matter. Everything here was mine first, including her." Evelyn's fists clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. Her voice cut sharp through the space between them. "I'm not yours, Silas. Not anymore." He ignored her. His eyes locked on Koda. "You think you can ride in here, toss a few coins at a judge, and take what belongs to me?" Koda lifted the rifle in one smooth motion, resting it against his shoulder. His gaze never left Silas. "That's exactly what I did. And now you're trespassing." For a long moment no one moved. Wind hissed through the dry grass, rattling the barn boards. Silas's hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip. Koda's rifle shifted a fraction. The barrel rocked steady, aimed with unbroken certainty. "Don't," he said, his voice carrying across the yard like iron. Silas froze. His eyes narrowed to slits. "This ain't over," he spat. "Maybe not," Koda answered evenly. "But it's over for today." Silas spat into the dust, wrenched his horse around, and rode hard. The sound of hooves faded into the wide silence. Evelyn released the breath she'd been holding, her shoulders trembling. "He'll be back," she whispered. Koda nodded once, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know. And so will I." That night the valley felt different. The air hung heavy, thick with waiting, as if the land itself sensed trouble circling. Evelyn stood at the window lamplight, trembling against the glass, eyes scanning the dark ridges for movement. It came sooner than she hoped. A faint glow flickered on the hills, bobbing against the black. At first she thought it was a ranch hand riding late, but the way it stopped, moved, then stopped again. It wasn't the rhythm of a traveler. It was a lantern. "Watching." "Koda," she called softly. He was already at the door, knife set aside, rifle in hand. He joined her at the window, eyes narrowing on the distant light. "They're testing us, seeing if we're awake." Her stomach nodded. "And if we weren't, they'd be closer." The lantern vanished, swallowed by the hills. The silence it left behind felt heavier than gunfire. At dawn, Koda walked the yard, reading the ground. Near the corral, he crouched low, fingers brushing damp earth. Boot tracks angled toward the barn. 2 men, maybe 3, too heavy for moccasins. He followed the trail a few steps, then stopped, jaw tight. They came while we were sleeping. Evelyn folded her arms around herself, voice tight. Why didn't Ash bark? They didn't come close enough to set him off, Koda said. Just close enough to count doors. She swallowed. So what do we do? Koda straightened rifle balanced across his arm, eyes sweeping the horizon. Sharp as a hawk's. We get ahead of them. For the rest of the day, they worked side by side, fast, deliberate. Koda showed her how to set snares along the north fence line where brush offered cover. Where the brush could hide a man. Easing in close, Koda stretched wire and hung a bell inside the barn so no door could move without raising a racket loud enough to wake the dead. Sandbags were stacked beneath the front windows. Water was cached in buckets by every entry. Each small measure tightened the ring, turning the house into more than a refuge. Evelyn watched him work. His movements were calm, almost surgical. That was when it struck her he wasn't only building defenses. He was teaching. Every nail he drove, every knot he cinched. Each was a lesson. She wasn't just a woman, left broken behind anymore. She was part of the stand. That evening, as the sun bled red along the horizon, they sat on the porch. Mesquite smoke sharpened the air. The quiet stretched. But it wasn't the hush of strangers. It was the stillness of 2 people, listening to the land waiting on the storm they both knew was coming. Far off along the black seam of hills, the lantern showed itself again. Only this time it didn't stop at the ridge. It dropped lower, closer, sliding toward the valley floor. Evelyn's breath snagged. Koda rose, rifle in hand, his voice steady as ever. They're not done with us. Not yet. And in the deepening dark, they both understood the fight for the ranch, for dignity, for a chance at peace had only begun. The storm barreled in from the west, a wall of slate clouds swallowing the horizon. Wind struck, first rattling shutters, bowing the cottonwoods until branches scraped the sky. Then the rain came hard and relentless, hammering the roof as if it meant to scour the earth clean. Inside, Koda fed another log to the fire, his rifle never more than an arm's reach away. Evelyn sat at the table with needle and thread, mending a tear in her skirt, though her eyes kept drifting to the window. Each lightning flash split the night into jagged shards. Thunder followed, and with every crash, her chest tightened. She'd lived through storms before, just not ones where the rain carried the promise of armed men. Ash stirred first, a low growl rolling up from deep in his chest. Koda's head snapped up. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling the rifle from the wall. They're here, he said, calm but edged with iron. Evelyn dropped the needle, hands shaking. How many? Doesn't matter, he replied already, moving for the door. Get the Colt. She grabbed the revolver. The weight felt strange but sure in her grip. The lessons he drilled into her rushed back, the stance, the sight, the feel of the trigger just before it broke. She swallowed and forced her breathing steady. Outside, shadows shifted through the rain. 3 men, maybe 4. Spreading across the yard, rifles flashing in the lightning. In the center, unmistakable even through the downpour, stood Silas Crow. His hat was pulled low, his grin twisted with spite. His voice cut through the storm. You think you can keep her from me, Apache? You think you can take what's mine? Koda stepped onto the porch, rain streaming from his coat. He set the rifle to his shoulder barrel, shining under the lightning. This land isn't yours, Silas, and neither is she. The first shot cracked splintering wood inches from Koda's leg. In the same breath, his Winchester answered. The report rolled across the valley, and one of Crow's riders dropped behind the trough with a curse. Clutching his arm, the wounded man staggered back as the fight exploded in full. Evelyn Hart dropped low behind the sandbags inside the house, her heart slamming against her ribs. A shape lunged toward the side window, shadows slicing through rain and darkness. She brought the Colt up the way Koda had taught her, lined the sights down the barrel and squeezed. The muzzle flash flooded the room with white light. Recoil punched her shoulder. Outside, a man reeled backward, cursing as he vanished into the storm. Her breath came fast and shallow, but her grip stayed firm. She had done it. The firefight raged in bursts of thunder and gunfire. Koda moved with seasoned calm, each shot chosen every step precise. Evelyn matched him in her own way, fear scraping at her nerves, resolve anchoring her in place. Each pull of the trigger, each roar of the Colt. Something inside her stitched itself whole again. Silas Crow's voice cut through the chaos. "Evelyn, you hear me? You can't hide behind him forever." Her reply rang out steady and harder than the crack of a rifle. "I'm not hiding, Silas. Not anymore." Another shot shattered the night, close enough to spray splinters across the table. Evelyn ducked, then lifted her head, again eyes burning. She was no longer the woman who had stood beneath a rope waiting to die. She was someone else now, someone who fought back. Rain hammered harder, blood dissolving into mud, drowning the shouts of Crow's riders as they scrambled for cover. Lightning ripped the sky open, and for a heartbeat the world gleamed silver. The barn, the corral figures crouched in the downpour. Koda's rifle thundered again. Another man dropped at last. Silas snarled an order. His men fell back, melting into the dark. Hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the storm, leaving only the hiss of rain and ragged breathing behind. Koda lowered his rifle chest, rising once, before settling. He stepped inside water, streaming from his hair eyes, locking on Evelyn. She was still kneeling behind the sandbags, the Colt smoking in her hands. "You all right?" he asked. Her fingers shook, but she nodded. I think I hit one of them." A rare, fleeting smile touched his mouth. "You did fine. Better than fine." He crossed the room and crouched so their eyes met. "You're stronger than you think." The words landed heavier than any bullet. She swallowed hard, throat tight. The bruises at her neck still ached, but inside, something had shifted. For weeks she had lived only to survive. Now, with the Colt still warm in her grip and Koda's steady gaze holding hers, she understood the truth. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. For her life, for her future. The storm eased by degrees. Thunder rolled away. Rain thinned to a whisper. Night settled into a tense, fragile quiet. Together they barred the doors, checked the windows, and banked the fire low. The house reeked of gunpowder and smoke, but beneath it lingered something else. Hope. Evelyn sat at the table, her body still trembling with adrenaline. Koda poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and slid one toward her. She took it in both hands, knuckles white. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she lifted her eyes to his. "I thought I was finished," she whispered. "When you cut me down, I thought it was only a delay. But tonight," she paused, searching for the right words. "Tonight I felt like I mattered again." Koda studied her, his expression unmoved, steady. His voice stayed low. "You do." The certainty of it settled deep, like warmth returning after a long cold. Outside, the storm finally broke. The valley lay rinsed and quiet. Inside, 2 people, marked by betrayal and loss, sat shoulder to shoulder, no longer strangers, no longer broken in the same way. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn Hart believed there might be a tomorrow worth fighting for, and Koda knew he would stand beside her to see it. The days after the storm fell quiet, but not with the peace they'd hoped for. It was a heavy stillness, a silence pulled tight, waiting to snap. They both knew Silas Crow hadn't given up. Men like him never did. So they worked. From sunup until daylight, bled out of the sky, their hands stayed busy. Koda cut timbers from the old shed to brace the barn doors and reinforce the lower windows. Evelyn hauled sandbags, her skirts caked with dust, her arms shaking but sure. Together, they ran tripwires along the north fence and hung bells above the doors, so even the slightest trespass would cry out a warning. Every nail driven, every board set in place meant more than defense. It was defiance. A statement to the land, to Silas, to themselves, that they would not be broken again. In the evenings, Koda set the Colt in Evelyn's hands and showed her how to hold it without fear. His voice remained calm, his patience unending. He adjusted her stance, guided her aim. At first her shots went wide, the barrel jerking in her grip. Koda never frowned, never mocked. He only nodded once and said, "Again." So she did. Again and again, until the crack of gunfire no longer startled her. Until her shoulders squared with a steadiness she thought was gone forever. One evening, when her bullet rang true against the tin target, she lowered the gun and looked at him, pride sparking in her eyes. He gave the smallest smile. "Told you, you'd get it." It was during those hours under the fading light and the sharp smell of gunpowder that something inside Evelyn began to shift. Not just safety, but dignity. Not just survival, but the first hint of power. In return, she trusted him with the memories she'd buried deepest. The child she once carried, the dreams that died with that small heartbeat, the hollow silence after Silas left. She spoke of the ache that emptied her, of the shame branded into her by whispers from the dust-town folk. Koda never interrupted. He listened, eyes steady, as if every word carried weight. And when her voice faltered, when grief tightened her throat, he spoke softly. "Out here no one decides your worth but you. Not Silas, not the town, not anyone." The words struck like a bell ringing clear through her chest. For the first time in years, she felt their truth. She was not just what had been done to her. She was not the rope, not the shame, not the abandoned wife left behind. She was Evelyn Hart, still standing, still fighting. Koda never called her strong. He didn't have to. His actions said it every hour, every day. In his steady presence, she found something she'd long stopped believing in. Respect. Not demanded, not traded, simply given. And though no vows were spoken, no promises sworn, the space between them tightened all the same. What grew there wasn't love yet. Not the kind pressed into letters or whispered in the dark. It was quieter, older, the sort of bond forged when two people scarred in different ways recognized themselves in one another. That night, as coyotes cried beyond the hills and the lantern burned low, Evelyn Hart stood by the window with the revolver resting in her palm. Her reflection stared back, bruises fading, eyes sharper than they'd been in years. For the first time, she didn't see a woman abandoned. She saw someone ready to meet whatever came next. And she knew she wouldn't meet it alone. Morning broke clean and bright, but the air carried weight as if the land itself held its breath. By midday, dust blooming along the southern horizon confirmed what they already knew. Silas Crow was coming back, and this time he wasn't alone. 4 riders thundered across the flats, rifles high, Silas at their head. Rage twisted his face, his voice cutting above the pounding hooves. "You thought you could keep what's mine. I'll burn this place to ash before I let you have it." Koda was already on the porch, Winchester in hand, his stance unshaken. "This land isn't yours, Silas," he called, "and neither is she." The first volley tore through the air, wood splintering, glass shattering. Koda answered with fire of his own, each shot deliberate, driving Crow's riders, scrambling for cover. Inside, Evelyn loaded cartridges with hands that trembled but never faltered, passing them to Koda in a steady rhythm. She had decided she would not stand idle again. When a shadow cut past the side window, she raised the Colt, braced as she'd been taught, and fired. The man lurched back with a curse, retreating into the chaos. Her heart thundered, but she held. She was no longer the woman who surrendered in silence. Not anymore. Gunfire hammered the walls and doors. Rifles cracked across the valley. Side by side, Koda and Evelyn stood, not protector and victim, but equals, each bearing the weight of survival and defiance. Then Silas changed tactics. While his men pinned Koda down, Silas broke wide, slipping around the barn. In a sudden rush, he seized Evelyn by the arm, wrenching her into the open yard. His pistol jammed beneath her jaw, his grin sharp with triumph. "You think you've won," he spat. "She's mine. Always was. Always will be." Evelyn fought fury blazing, but the cold steel bit into her skin. Koda stepped off the porch rifle, lowered but unwavering eyes locked on Silas. His voice came low, calm as stone. "You've already lost, Silas. You just don't see it yet." Silas laughed ragged wild. "Lost, I've got her right here." Koda shook his head once. "She was never yours. She's her own." "That's what you'll never understand." For a split second, doubt flickered in Silas's eyes. And in that heartbeat, Evelyn moved. Her heel crushed down on his instep. Her head snapped back into his face. He reeled, the pistol slipping, and in that same breath, Koda's rifle thundered. The round tore through Silas Crow's shoulder, spinning him sideways into the hitching post. His pistol flew free, clattering into the dirt. Before he could gather himself, Koda was there, hauling him upright, driving him back against the wood. The fury on Silas's face cracked. Fear leaked through the bravado. "This is your last warning," Koda said, his voice sharp as splintered glass. "You ride out now, or you don't ride again." Silas's breath came ragged. His eyes flicked between Koda's rifle and Evelyn Hart's unwavering stare. For the first time, he saw what he'd truly lost. Not just the land, not just his hold on power, but the woman who no longer flinched at his shadow. With a curse, he lurched for his horse, mounting with his good arm. Crow's riders followed, casting wary glances back, their swagger stripped bare. Dust rose as they rode hard for the horizon, defeat trailing them like smoke from a dying fire. The yard went still. Evelyn's chest heaved, the Colt still tight in her grip. Koda lowered his rifle, his gaze softening as it found her. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stood." Her breath caught, her voice broke but held. Not alone. And in that truth, the last of Silas Crow's hold over her, shattered, lifted, and carried away on the wind. The days that followed settled into a quiet that felt almost strange. No riders on the horizon, no gunshots echoing through the hills, just the slow, steady rhythm of ranch life returning. Koda mended broken fence lines, hands sure against weathered wood. Evelyn swept dust from the house, tended the small garden behind the porch, and caught herself humming without meaning to. It wasn't perfect peace. The land remained hard, the work endless, the scars still tender on them both. But it was peace enough, the kind that asked only the will to keep standing. One evening, as the sun melted into copper and the first stars blinked awake, Koda and Evelyn sat side by side on the porch. They spoke neither of the past nor of what tomorrow might bring. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't empty. It was chosen. Two souls bound not by promises or possession, but by resilience, by respect, and the quiet knowing that they had walked through fire and come out stronger. Above them, the night spread wide, stitched with stars, and in that vast hush, a truth settled between them. On a land that gave nothing easily, they had built something together that could not be taken, not by guns, not by shame, not even by the past. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so more stories like this can find their way to you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that hope can take root even in the harshest places, share this with them too. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work